Let's get into it. Sold Not For Sale podcast. We got a doozy of an episode. It's about the border crisis. Of course, I give you guys updates all the time. This one is a little different. We got Joe Rogan and Brett Weinstein talking about the border issues that have been going on. Now, Brett Weinstein has a different perspective because he went all the way to South America and he actually saw the trek that people take. The thing that he found was how many Chinese immigrants were trying to get into the United States through Texas. Now, his theory is very, very interesting. And as I started looking into it, I found a couple of, mainstream stories about the same thing, this surge in Chinese immigrants coming through the southern border. And as you start hearing Brett's version of what he saw and the mainstream's version of, just the story that they compiled, seems very different. Similar, but very different. Now, Brett obviously has some sinister take of why this is happening, and it makes perfect sense. I mean, military-aged men coming from China by the thousands. It doesn't seem good. So we're actually going to be talking about that. So we're going to go on from Joe Rogan and Brett to Brett and Tucker actually talking about this because he gets deeper into the subject when he talks to Tucker Carlson. And he also talks about who's funding this. When you hear all this stuff, it's going to blow your mind. Then I'm going to show you the mainstream stuff. Then I'm going to show you Jimmy and Tucker actually talking about something that I'm just going to call the undocumented army, because it's a whole thing going on. They're offering immigrants status after they serve in the army, and that takes a whole sinister tone as well. We'll get into that. Then we have people talking about the prepaid debit cards that are being given to the tune of $56 million, I believe. And then we have Stephen A. Smith waking up to this whole thing, and he goes on a very special rant. And then we have Tucker at the end talking about the real truth behind this whole thing. So just give me a quick second here. Don't forget about IamCoachColin.com, and the discount code is IamCoachColin, all capital letters, all one word, one L in the name Colin. Let's get to this clip.
You went and saw the migration. You saw the groups of people that are making their way up through.
Yeah, I was invited. Actually, my son Zach, and I went to Panama, where I have some history. I did my bat work on Barrow, Colorado Island in Gatun Lake, the Panama Canal. So Panama's a place I'm familiar with, but Michael Yan invited us down to go look at the migration in the Darien province of Panama, which is the province bordering Colombia. As you probably know, there's a gap in the Pan American Highway, about 60 miles, that were never built. And this highway that otherwise stretches from Prudhoe Bay, Alaska, to the southern tip of South America. And what's there is a tremendously significant and very difficult jungle in the Darien Gap. So there's a national park there. And ordinarily, people do not cross the Darien Gap. It is a famously difficult obstacle. And what we see there is that the international community is encouraging a massive migration of people from South America into Central America, and that almost all of those people are ending up crossing our southern border and entering the U.S. The ones who are questioned are claiming political asylum, which is not accurate. So we talked to many, many migrants, and the universal story amongst the migrants who would talk to us is that they were fleeing bad economic conditions in the direction of what looks like greater opportunity. They've been told by the international community that they should come across the Darien Gap, where many of them are not surviving the trek. It's extremely dangerous. And they are migrating north. Now, the really troubling thing, though, is that migration is familiar in one way. It looks a little bit like the migrations of Central Americans that migrated north when we were kids. But there is another migration. There is a migration of Chinese immigrants that looks different, feels different, and is being housed in a totally separate way in Darien for reasons that are not in any way obvious. Now, I don't know exactly what to make of that. I have hypotheses. There are no more than that. But the Chinese migration is not forthcoming about why it is migrating. It is composed mostly of young military-age men. There are some women present, but it's not 50-50 by far. And the international community has arranged separate encampments The Chinese are in many cases traveling a separate way across the Darien Gap. They're skipping some of the worst parts of it, traveling by boat. And as I think I mentioned, they are, when asked where they're from, where they're going, why they're going, they are uninterested in talking. There's a hostility to it that I found shocking. Because for one thing, if you imagined folks from almost anywhere in the world were heading to the U.S. because they didn't like the way things were in China, they feared their government, they thought that there was economic opportunity, they would be curious about Americans. These are soon to be their countrymen. They would tend to be interested in talking. And even if they, for some reason, because they had lived under a totalitarian regime, felt that they couldn't talk, they wouldn't be broadcasting hostility. They would be ambivalent or something. And that is not the impression that they leave when interacting with them. So I found that utterly alarming. And I came to wonder if the migration of people coming up from South America, many of whom, by the way, are not South American. There are people coming from the Middle East. We met Afghans. There are people from Iran, Yemen, all over the world. They land in Ecuador, which has no visa requirement, and then they migrate through Colombia into Central America and straight up to the U.S. But in any case, that massive migration seems to provide a cloak for this other migration from China, which is nothing if not mysterious.
Why are they letting it happen? Why do you think the government is allowing the border to be so porous? And why are they resisting when Texas tries to do something about it?
Well, I always worry when we're trying to understand what's happening and the information is not being shared with us. You have to ask yourself the question of how many separate things are in play, right? Before I went to Panama, I thought there was a migration of people. Now I think there are two. One of them's clearly a migration, and the other one could well be an invasion. So if I know that there are two things, then I can put them in two categories, and I can ask myself the question, why is this being allowed, and why is that being allowed? The consensus, maybe consensus is too strong, but the belief amongst many who have been on the story of the migration for years now is that this is a ploy to create voters, Democratic voters. And I don't think that's impossible. I think that's probably playing a role. I don't know how realistic it is. I don't know whether or not it is clear that migrants necessarily carry the likelihood of voting blue that the blue team imagines. But anyway, I think that that's a plausible explanation in part, but I don't think it really covers it. There are other hypotheses that are darker. There is talk about the possibility of trading citizenship for military service. I think that's a very frightening prospect, but I didn't invent the idea. It has been discussed, and the problem is that to the extent that we saw things like the vaccine mandate drive out the skeptics from the military, this process would also bring in a lot of people into military service who would have more reason to follow immoral orders than a citizen soldier who had been American their whole life. In other words, if the power structure is granting you citizenship which you want in exchange for your obedience, then what is it that would cause you to say no? So if you wanted a force that was capable of acting on behalf of tyranny against Americans, then a force that doesn't have a deep history with the rights of being an American, that doesn't have a long-standing allegiance to people within the country, that force would be potentially more compliant, and that worries me.
That should worry you. I really didn't consider that until you just said that. But my thought about this idea of the military turning on the citizens was always, but the military is citizens, and many of them are deeply patriotic and unlikely to do something like that. But if they did swap out immigrants, and they did do that, holy shit.
This is exactly.
Then you have a real coup.
This is what spooks me, is that in thinking about the various scenarios 5 years ago, even 3 years ago, I would have said, I fear that somebody is going to issue immoral orders to the military, but I'm convinced that the military will divide over them, that there are those who will carry out immoral orders and there are others who won't.
And at the same time, there was a senator, I think from Massachusetts, that introduced a bill to ban what they call paramilitary training, which is just training with firearms, like to get better at them.
Right.
So the idea is you have a right to keep and bear arms, but you can't be good at them because you can't practice.
So if you imagine, in my naive state a few years ago, the idea was, well, you have a very well-armed populace. You have a military that's likely to be divided about immoral orders. I don't like the sound of that, but I don't think that it's a slam dunk that the tyrants win, because the part of the military that's not going to follow immoral orders and the citizenry that will fight to defend the republic, that's a pretty powerful force. But then you have vaccine mandates, which force out most of the people who are independent-minded from the military. And then you have the idea that migrants might be granted citizenship in exchange for military service. And
has that been introduced anywhere, or is this just a complete hypothesis?
No, it's not a hypothesis. Actually, maybe Jamie, you could look it up. I don't want to slander anybody, but yes, I believe it has been raised by at least one senator.
Jesus Christ.
Is that the paramilitary thing?
No. The other thing, the thing about granting citizenship to illegal immigrants in exchange for military service.
So, in any case, I did not. It took a lot of thinking about different pieces of the puzzle to begin to wonder about something like this. But having wondered about it, it doesn't disappear from my mind as, oh, that's just simply crazy. Actually, this, given the number of things that don't add up, this begins to explain them in, a reasonably parsimonious way, and it has me worried. But that is not inherently, in fact, it is probably not the same thing as what would explain the concentration of Chinese migrants.
Right.
All right, the Chinese migrants presumably have left China with the knowledge of their government. The bias of that group in favor of males is something we can talk about if you want to, but it has an obvious interpretation. And that ought to frighten us as well, right? So at the same...
How many are we talking about? Is there an estimate of how many military-aged Chinese men have gotten into the country?
Now, I'm always hesitant at this point in the conversation because what I saw is
24,000. I let that clip run a little long because I just wanted to get to that point, because we're going to go deeper into that subject now. We got Brett Weinstein again talking with Tucker Carlson, talking a little deeper about his experience with this whole thing, because for some reason, Brett has had this whole experience, and they only talk about this in the JRE episode near the end. I mean, that timestamp there, if I was to give it to you, is 3 hours, 9 minutes, 15 seconds. Right? And the episode only goes to about 3 hours, I think 30 minutes. So they only talk about it right at the end, which is surprising because, why wouldn't you talk about this way more? So let's jump into the Tucker Carlson, Brett Weinstein real quick. This is just Brett talking about who is funding this. Just some information that I'm sure you've never heard, because with my updates, and I'm sure with all the updates that you go after, you keep on hearing about how many people are coming through, because that's the main concern. How many people are coming through illegally? Why is everything so open? Things of that nature. But what he's going to talk about right now is something that more people really need to hear about. So let's get into this.
We were on our own, and people were interested in talking, including migrants. So we had many conversations with migrants. And these migrants, I have to tell you, when they come to the southern border of the U.S., they get through on the basis that they are political refugees. They aren't. When we talk to them in the transit camp, everybody tells the same story. They're fleeing economic collapse, and they are fleeing in the direction of what they perceive to be economic opportunity. And of course, in American law, these two things are very different. We protect people who are seeking political asylum, but we do not offer automatic economic asylum. And the reason for that is fairly clear, which is that in order to protect people economically, we end up robbing Americans of their economic well-being. And that's just not something that people are entitled to, no matter how much compassion you may have for people fleeing Venezuela. It is not our responsibility, especially not without some sort of a plan, an agreement about how many people are going to come through and in what way we're going to take care of them and how that's going to get paid for. We don't do that. But in any case, you get the same story from everybody. They're fleeing an economic crisis, and they're moving north, and many of them have terrible stories about what happened to them in the Darien Gap. So that's one thing. And you see, when you go into this camp, Canam and Brio, you see the hallmark of the international community. You see NGO emblems all over the place, proudly American flags. They've paid for the water system, the toilets that are there. The United States government is facilitating this economic migration, and it's unmistakable, as is an organization called the IOM, which is the International Organization for Migration. It's a branch of the UN. And if you read their charter, you will discover that this organization believes that migration is an inherently good thing, that it's always good. And so they see it as their job to bring it about, to facilitate it. And in this case, that's particularly tragic because their desire to induce people to migrate is causing people who are woefully unprepared for the Darien Gap to try to make that journey. And the humanitarian tragedy is immense.
So the UN, of which the United States is, I think, the largest donor by far, is paying for this with the U.S. government.
Yep. Apparently they are. Now, Panamanians are largely unaware. Some are aware that there's a migration, but in large measure, this migration, once it gets through the Darien Gap, boards buses, and effectively what I now understand is that all of the countries in Central America are effectively waving the migrants through because those migrants are not going to stop in these countries. As long as they keep going to the U.S., these countries are willing to remain silent about it. Now, in 1991, Heather and I actually traveled the other direction through Central America, through all of the countries south to Costa Rica. And all of those borders are tightly controlled.
Oh, I've been, yeah.
And so it is very surprising to find those controls are effectively lifted here. That's clearly the result of a massive coordination. And of course, it's resulting in a large migration.
So that's the interesting information, to see that there is this almost like a checkpoint of sorts as they're trying to get through this. I was going to show you guys this a little later, but in terms of what they're talking about, now I was going to use this to show you how the Chinese are coming through. So they're actually getting in here, right? And then this is the Darien Gap that he's talking about. It's extremely dangerous. Now, just to show you guys, they're going from here. They're getting wave through. This becomes a very dangerous place. However you get through there, you're kind of on your own. But you get to Panama, you're getting wave through. Nicaragua, you're getting wave through. Guatemala, you're getting wave through. And we all know Mexico, you're getting waved right through. My question is, why are they allowed to do this? Why don't any of these places have to answer for this? It's very odd to me. Don't forget to subscribe and share this content. Please do. I'm going to move on to the actual mainstream story. It's a brief couple of segments that I'm going to show you, but it just shows that just remember what Brett was saying, right? And then listen to what they're saying. I don't know. It's just very odd. And I know the mainstream, we always look at them as though they lie, but in this case, maybe they're just uninformed. They're not there. They don't have boots on the ground. Brett, for some reason, actually did. I mean, leave it to a biologist to actually go and do this work. I mean, Brett's not a journalist. He's a biologist. But let's check this out real quick.
At the border, American volunteers help out the new arrivals. Samuel Schultz.
We're used to seeing border crossers here, Central Americans, Mexicans, trying to avoid the border patrol. And here we have this giant mass of Asians coming in saying, please arrest me. Where's the guy who's going to arrest me?
The route is an open secret, first from China to Quito in Ecuador, which Chinese can enter without a visa, and then onward with detailed online advice. In this video, for example, a guide shows Quito Airport on Google Maps. If you land at night, he says, don't go outside. Next morning, catch the bus to Tolcan and carry on north. The online cartoons make it look easy. It's not.
So it's very, very dangerous.
Immigration lawyer Xiaoshang Wang represents Chinese migrants in the U.S.
They could be killed.
So this guy represents them. He actually helps them kind of process through, which is also kind of interesting. But when they're saying that they get help, they actually get help online through not so much YouTube videos, but guess which platform they actually get help with? TikTok. There's TikTok videos that are helping these guys get through. And, I was just actually looking here for the map that I found. The story was actually this. Migrants find tips on Chinese version TikTok for long trek to U.S.-Mexican border. It's very odd. It's very odd, especially when you hear what Brett's saying. Let's move on. I got another clip here, just briefly. Again, it's just more towards the Chinese migrants, the growing number
of Chinese migrants are crossing into the United States from Mexico without visas, taking irregular overland routes across Latin America. Over the course of 3 weeks, Reuters witnessed hundreds of Chinese nationals along an isolated border stretch in southeastern Texas. Reuters interviewed more than 24 of them. All of those interviewed said they got the idea to take the land route on social media and drew on influencers, private groups, and comments to plan their trips.
The people here, the police here, I think they are very kind, and that's the America in my head.
So that was that gentleman's testimony real quick. Now we're going to play a little more of Brett actually talking about this. He's talking about the actual Chinese presence and just what he thinks of all this. But just, you know, we're this far into the episode. I mean, I just wonder, what do you think about all this? It seems very, like I said, in my updates, I keep focusing on how many people are getting through. And we knew that it was various places. We knew that people from Venezuela were getting sent back. We knew that there were a lot of South Americans. We knew that there were a bunch of Middle Eastern people. But I didn't know about the surge of Chinese immigrants. And it's not to say as if I don't like Chinese or whatever, but it's just odd. And as you start hearing, again, I played those mainstream tellings of what's going on. That gentleman was like, he sees this mass of people and they're all just like, arrest me. They just want to get taken in quickly. It's so different. And then when Brett starts explaining more about how they're able to circumvent most of the danger that these South Americans have to go through, because if you're South American, that Darien Gap, you have to get through that. And it's so dangerous. So many different things can happen to you if you even make it through it altogether. It's just very, very dangerous. It's jungle. There's a bunch of people who are, I don't want to say cartel. They're just like hoodlums, right? They'll rob you. They'll kidnap you. They'll do whatever to you as soon as they can get their hands on you. So it's hard to get through. You can never travel at night. If you travel at night, you're done. But here, let's just play a little more of Brett and Tucker talking. Let's put this up here real quick.
This migration doesn't appear to me to be just one thing.
Slow it down. Slow it down, Colin. I know. I'm sorry. I play it way too fast all the time. Sorry about that, guys. Let's go.
To another camp called San Vicente. And everything in San Vicente is different than it was at Canaan Mombrio. San Vicente, first of all, it's not a town. This is a camp that is built as a transit camp. It's built of containers and various objects to house people. And it is almost entirely Chinese. Now, there were Chinese folks. Chinese.
That's a long way from China.
It sure is. And what's more, in this camp, the rule that you're able to go in and walk around and talk to people is not in evidence. The Senafront, the Panamanian border control, actually forbid us to go into the camp. So we had to stay on the outside of it. We were also forbidden to photograph it. So what photographs we have were taken covertly. But the most striking thing...
Wait, may I ask, is it the government of China, do you believe, that's funding this?
Well, let me tell you the other thing I found, and then I think the answer to that will become clearer. Outside of the San Vicente camp, the Chinese migrants are, you can interact with them. There are a couple of shops where they go to buy water or snacks or whatever. And so you can interact with them at those places. They are the opposite of forthcoming. They have no interest in talking to outsiders. And I've been to dangerous places before. I've been to places where people fear their government and can't talk to you because they feel it's not safe. This didn't feel like that at all. This felt like people who did not want to share information because it would be a mistake to do so. And what's more, there was an incident where Michael, who has lived in China, he's been all over the world, and he started up or tried to start up a conversation with a guy who claimed to be from Korea. And Michael tripped him up and got him to speak Chinese. And then there was uproarious laughter at the fact that he had tried to pull this caper on Michael. So it is not a friendly migration. These Chinese folks who are overwhelmingly male, military age. There are women present. I realized only this morning that in thinking back, I saw few, if any, children in the Chinese migration. They were everywhere in the other places we visited, but they were not present, as far as I remember, in the San Vicente camp. So what I have pieced together, and this is a place where I'm going to speculate. This is a hypothesis. This is not a conclusion. But what I began to suspect was that the Chinese migration is actually being cloaked by the economic migration coming from South America, and that is consistent with the observation that it has some different motivation. Now, I learned from Michael that the Chinese migrants in the San Vicente camp largely bypassed the Darien. Because they have money, they can go by boat, and they can skip most of the peril of the Darien Gap. And in any case, it's a very different phenomenon. And to see it housed so separately is quite conspicuous. I do not know what the rationale for this.
Can you estimate, do you have any sense of how many Chinese, these are Chinese nationals?
They seem to be.
How many did you see, Ish? Talking 60 or 600 or?
It's very hard to say because we were held at one edge of the camp. So I probably saw 150 faces, but the camp is deeper. Now, Michael does some drone reconnaissance, and he's also been to this camp many times. He would definitely be the person to ask in terms of a good estimate for how many of these folks there are. But the degree to which this is not consistent with well, let me back up a second. I regard the Chinese people as victims of an oppressive government that I fear for my own reasons.
For sure.
So there's nothing about the fact that these folks are Chinese that throws me. And if they were fleeing that government, I'm not sure what we should do about it, but I'm certainly supportive of their desire. I would feel a great deal of sympathy. And in fact, I felt a great deal of sympathy for all of the other migrants that I met. But the sense of, it's really hard not to use the term hostility that I felt from the Chinese was particularly unsettling, given that I know where they're headed, right? They're headed to the U.S.
And just to be totally clear on that point, this was not a work camp for a, Chinese infrastructure project. And
no, it was not. And what I know is taking place at the southern border of the U.S. Makes this even more disturbing, because although the controls at the southern border are still there for those of us who are crossing legally, the lack of any control for those who are crossing illegally is stunning. So if I may just compare, when I came back from Panama, I approached a kiosk with my passport ready to scan it. I didn't have to. A camera took my picture. And although I didn't know that my picture was about to be taken, I hadn't taken my hat off, I was wearing my glasses, the kiosk told me I didn't need to put my passport there. And then a customs officer behind me called my name, Brett. He said, "Do you have anything to declare?" I said, "No." He said, "You're good to go." So we have technology that is capable of identifying a person with that level of ease, to the point that they knew exactly who was coming through the border. But we are not apparently taking that information when people cross our southern border. What we're doing at most is asking them their name and their birth date and taking them at their word.
But no biometric collection?
Apparently not.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. And I mean, it's so funny because I just did an episode on the border bill that Biden was trying to present that was really mostly just for Ukraine and Israel and, other nations. And, a small percentage, somebody corrected me, I think it was about 16.5% of the money in that bill actually went towards the border. And the rest of it just went elsewhere. It's funny because the technology that Biden was toting about how he has these fentanyl detectors and this is so good and blah, blah, blah. And then Brett brings up how they have this technology available and they're not doing anything like that at the southern border. It's all just so interesting to hear this side of things. Again, this is a talk between Brett Weinstein and Tucker Carlson. So go and look that up. It's an hour long, you can see it on the screen there. It's an hour and 12 minutes, 31 seconds long. And he has a very interesting take on this stuff. And I don't know what to think because we hear so many things, right? And right now we're about to touch on Tucker Carlson and Jimmy Dore, just because Joe Rogan and Brett were touching on the whole military, people serving in the military in order to become citizens. Well, that's a real thing. Jimmy Dore and Tucker Carlson are going to talk about that, and they're also going to play a clip of somebody kind of saying the quiet part out loud of why this is happening, and it's just very odd. It's all very odd, because what is it? Is it votes? Military? Police? Chinese invasion cloaked as economic asylum, cloaked as political asylum? Like, what's going on? So let's just get a little deeper into it with the whole military thing. You'll be shocked to hear this stuff.
So I have come around on this issue, and I realized that there actually is a game being played. And here is Dick Durbin, and he's going to give the game away. This is about a week or two ago. Dick Durbin gave a speech, and it was all about why we need immigration and why we have to take all the people who are here illegally and as quickly as possible turn them into citizens. And he's going to give the game away right here. Here we go. And by the way, he's got all the fire in the belly of Fred Rogers. Here we go. Watch.
We need order at the border. Yes, we need to have changes in the laws that reflect the reality of the overwhelming numbers from all over the world who are coming to our shores and our border. But there's also an incredible demand for legal immigration into this country even now.
Why?
The presiding officer, my colleague from the state of Illinois, has legislation which addresses one aspect of that. Her bill, and I hope I describe it accurately, says that if you're an undocumented person in this country and you can pass the physical and the required test, background test, and the like, you can serve in our military, and if you do it honorably, we will make you citizens of the United States. Do we need that? Do you know what the recruiting numbers are at the Army, and the Navy, and the Air Force? They can't reach their quotas each month.
So he just so there it is. He's the reason why our border has about the same level of security as your Facebook page is because we need foreign slaves as conscripts. That's what we do. The Yankees are wising up to the scam of these foreign wars, and what's going to drive people into the shredders? The old standby, desperation.
This is Gangs of New York.
So right. So there's people who don't want to join their own military, but they want to go to someone else's country and join their military. That's really what they want. So we need immigrants for our Squid Games. That's what he's saying. Hey, and not just for the military.
And that's the best case scenario. That's the best case. I mean, first of all, they drove a lot of, anyone with self-respect was already driven out of the military by the vax mandates. So the high testosterone population has dropped dramatically in the military, and they do have a massive recruiting problem. Now, I would say the answer is clean up the military, give it missions that the average person can support. People aren't joining the military because they don't support the mission.
That's right.
Right? They don't want to die or send their sons to die for Ukraine. Sorry. But we should consider another possibility here. So if they were about 50 million people without undocumented, illegal, whatever you want to call them, foreign nationals in our country who are not citizens. In a lot of cases, we don't know who they are. So if you're, and the majority of the ones who have come in the last 3 years are young military-age men. So if we say, okay, all of a sudden you get to join the military, and our military is populated by people who don't know anything about the United States at all, you have to consider the possibility that the point is not to use them to fight another foreign war, but the point may be to use them domestically. And the U.S. military increasingly, certainly over the last 3 years, but really over the last couple of decades, has been used for domestic purposes, not the National Guards. That's constitutional. The governor calls the guard out, right? There's a problem. But the standing U.S. military has been used, and its intel services have been used. And that is the case on January 6th, but I think it's the case much more often than that. So if all of a sudden you're saying our military, we should give automatic weapons to people who just got here from foreign countries who we know nothing about at all, and those people can be used to keep order in the United States, I mean, this is literally how Rome fell. I mean, as you may or may not know, literally taking foreigners into the legions, and all of a sudden they're like, well, wait a second, we don't know what this Rome thing is, and we're not into it. And they ended the empire. They ended Rome. So we should be very careful about this because it's at scale, because it's tens of millions of people. It's not like if you're my age, 54, you grew up thinking, well, I have very positive feelings. Again, I grew up near the border of immigrants, like trying hard and like, it's hard to get here. It's a hassle. You're doing all the shit jobs no one will do. And it's sort of like good people, I would say. But if you import tens of millions of people all at once, like you don't know exactly who's there or why they're here or like, what is this? You could capsize your country really easily with stuff like this. Last thing I'll say is that Dick Durbin's an evil man. I don't think he's mistaken. I don't think he's misguided. I don't think any of this is an accident. I think he's a servant of evil, and I really mean that.
Tucker, he said he's going to make them cops as well.
Oh, wait, I'll go on. Yeah. Watch this. So he has more to say. So then he goes on. Another reason why. So we have this open border. Here we go.
Find enough people to join our military forces. And there are those who are undocumented who want the chance to serve and risk their lives for this country.
Yeah.
Should we give them a chance? I think we should.
Yeah, so we just need to take away every other avenue and then let them walk up the ramp just like cattle. Sometimes it amazes me how much our culture operates like a factory farm. It really is. I think it's important to know how the sausage is being made. But if they are using us to make the sausages,
let me tell you
the
about
price of college come down then if they're doing this with recruiting.
Here we go. I know. Here we go. So listen, he's got more to say.
Others that we need. In my state of Illinois, in inner city in Chicago, in the rural areas downstate, we're holding our breath, hoping that we can keep hospitals open. You know why? We don't have enough medical personnel.
What?
And yet there are people all around this world who have medical credentials as doctors and nurses and skilled technicians who want to come to the United States, but we don't give them the chance. I think it's a reasonable thing to do. I think it would make us a better nation and a healthier nation.
So there aren't enough Americans that are going into medical school or nursing schools, Tucker? Did you know that there's empty medical schools all across the country? I didn't know this. Did you know that?
No, I do think we're seeing an actual revolution. I think the immigration thing, it's been so poisoned by the race question, unfortunately, that no one can have a rational conversation about it. But taking away, anything to do with race or national origin, ethnicity, anything, religion, even anything like that, the scale of the change is so profound that nobody can handle it. We're going to wait. People don't understand. I mean, New York City is our largest city in the United States, biggest city in North America. It's 8 million people. We've imported multiples of that just in the last several years. So we've completely changed the country in ways that are not yet visible, but are about to be. And one of the many effects of this is that the people who are born here get kind of crowded out. And I mean, there are tons of people sitting at home who are driven out of the workforce for a bunch of different reasons over the past 4 years, and they're languishing and dying, and nobody cares at all about them. And so leaving aside even the moral calculations there, just to return to first principles, the only job of the U.S. government is to take care of Americans. We pay for it. We vote for it. It's ours. It's our country. So if they stop doing that, then they are, I think, ripe for a revolution, hopefully a nonviolent one, but definitely a revolution of some kind, because that's completely not the purpose of a representative democracy. I mean,
Man, Tucker is so right. I let that clip run a little long just because the main thing that came from that clip is when Tucker talked about having people do immoral things because they have a different mindset if they are in the military. They're doing it in order to become citizens. So now they're just following orders. And they're not doing it to their fellow countrymen. They're doing it to just other people. And they're coming from places where that type of thing is okay. Not to say that they would all do it, but there's probably a large majority that would, because, not every single person is just like a military age man. Some guys are really dads and they really do have kids and a wife in another place, and as soon as they can plant their feet properly, they'll be able to bring them over. And if it's between doing something that's seen as immoral, if it's between doing that thing or not doing it and their family being able to come over or not come over, they're going to choose their family, as any man would. It's very interesting. And then also the police service as well, and then the medical stuff. And there's a man who's they're really pushing for that kind of thing. And we keep hearing rumbles of this, here and there. And there's always some mainstream media pundit or outlet that writes articles that says, no, that's not true. That's not a real thing. And it's very real. It's very real. That's why I felt like that clip really needed to be shown. Now, there is something going on with prepaid debit cards in New York. They're being given to migrants. I believe they spent money to the tune of, I want to say $53 million. Let me just double check that really quick. I want to say $53 million was spent on this. And this is, again, another thing where people were like, that's not true. They're not being given visas. They're not being given prepaid debit cards, but they are. That's a real thing. 500. No. I can't find the number. $53 million. Yep. $53 million. You see it right there. Right? The city has earmarked $53 million for food and baby supplies for migrants, most of whom entered the U.S. illegally and are applying for asylum. And now we're learning more, just from the other clips that I showed you, that this political asylum that everybody's applying for isn't always really the case. It's more of economic asylum, which is also something, that it's also a problem, but that is not what the asylum system is actually for. You can't do it for I'm fucking tripping over my words here. Brett said it. He said, you know, it's economic asylum is not something that the system's for. You can't do it. You can't just be like, well, you know, it's just not good over there for me. So I entered illegally here, and I need you guys to just hold me up. Just hold me down for a little while. I'm going to get a job and just make it work here. You can't do that. Political is you're in danger. You're literally in danger. And again, if you look at most of the places, it's not that they're really in danger. China, there could be an argument that you're in danger in China. If you follow suit, you won't be in danger, obviously. But if you're somebody who wants to rebel against the Communist Party there, obviously, you are in danger. So, but then again, honestly, think about from China to, let's show this map again. From China all the way to, what was it? Quito? That map that I showed you guys. So there's a lot of stops that you can make when you're leaving China before you get here. Before you get here, there's a lot of other places you can go to. You could set up in the Philippines. You could set up in all these other places and be fine economically and be out of danger if it is like political asylum. But all these guys are choosing this. I don't know. It seems very odd. But let's touch on the prepaid card thing that's going on here. This is Isaiah Uncensored. He's talking to two people, one on the left, one on the right. I'm obviously going to play the guy on the right. The guy on the left is going to get a little chance to chime in, but he's mostly just talking about oppressive laws are the reason, and it's not really the illegal immigrants that are at fault. So let's go.
Homelessness in the United States in general.
All right. Kevin Fulton, attorney, your thoughts on this program in New York City by Mayor Eric Adams?
It's absolutely trash. First of all, I understand people who are coming here for a better situation for themselves. But before we get to them, how about the blacks who have been in this country for generations that are still trying to get a better situation for themselves? New York, when you look at the demographics, 56% of the people in homeless shelters, black. 40% of households with kids are food insecure. So New York already has a problem in the demographics that have impacted the most for blacks. Blacks have to stop giving their votes to politicians who are not earning it. In New York, they want to give away $53 million instead of making sure that families that have been there that helped build up New York are taken care of first, and that's not what they're doing. So we have to do better with our vote.
From your perspective, should there be any assistance, though? Obviously, you don't want a new and increasing homeless population. If you have migrants come here, then you'll find them on the streets as well, and it's a growing problem.
It is a growing problem, which is why the border needed to be shut down. You cannot take care of the influx that are coming in. It's just not possible. We already have a population on the streets, whether it's veterans, mentally ill. We already have people on the streets that are not being taken care of because there's not enough money being put towards that population. Now you have an increase of a new population that you also have to take care of. So if we have to take care of anybody, we take care of the ones that have been here first, that have been suffering for generations already, who helped build this country up. That's why I say you start with the money.
And for those who say, for those who are here, Americans who may be homeless, maybe having mental health issues, there are programs in place, but many of them choose not to use it.
They choose not to use it because our mental health system is broken. When they say, hey, we're offering mental health programs, people that are out there and they're homeless, they're not going to seek those. People have to actually go out and seek them. I've always pushed for us to have mental health counselors in high schools, in schools, in apartments, low-income housing, places where people are actually at, instead of thinking that someone who's mentally ill is going to find you and seek you out. So those programs are there, but they need to be expanded and be more effective.
And Cesar, would you be opposed to a program if the city of Houston said, let's give out some cards and help those who come into this country illegally so they won't end up in the homeless population?
Well, first of all, the population that we're talking about are asylum seekers, and under U.S. law, they are coming here legally, presenting themselves on asylum. Number two, I think the same thing, or going back to the point where you know, we have to do a better job at helping out the homeless population in general and figuring out, going to the root causes of the problem instead of putting patches on any problem, whether it's the migrant crisis or the homelessness crisis. And we can't continue to pin communities against each other, saying it's your fault, it's their fault.
Is that what you see happening, especially with an issue like this?
With issues and with the rhetoric that was spilled out by this gentleman, that's what ends up causing to somebody that doesn't know any better. And it really is unfortunate. And the other thing is that conservatives have constantly taken money away from mental health services, from civic services to help out people, claiming that they don't want to give any handouts. So you can't have it two ways. You can't say we want to curb homelessness, but then we're also going to take the money away.
If you can do it in 10 seconds, that's all we got.
Hey, no rhetoric, Isaiah. It's just facts. Black people are out there suffering in New York, and they're taking that money and giving it to a population who hasn't put anything into this country.
All right.
It's so funny to hear the guy on the left, the guy with the glasses on here, this guy here. It's so funny to hear him say it's about the homelessness issue and, you know, talking about putting on Band-Aids when what that gentleman, the other guy, the black guy here, what he brought up was, you know, that's why the border should have been closed. Like, border security is not a Band-Aid. Border security is like literally stitching up a wound, an open wound. So it's just funny to hear him try to focus it on the homeless issue, and you took things away from this and you can't have it both ways. It's just, there are, and this gentleman's focusing on black people because, you know, there is a large black population that's affected by this, and that's why they're starting to turn to Trump in voting, because they're like, we've been voting Democrat for, we don't even know why. We were just told we have to, and now we don't want to anymore because our quality of life is going down dramatically because of the policies that all these Democratic leaders have in place. It's just, but this is affecting all Americans, especially in New York. Both of these gentlemen are in New York. This is affecting everybody. It's affecting Americans, you know? I don't know. It's just very interesting to hear the other side of things and to have this gentleman bring up things like the homeless situation. Like, it's not, when we're talking about the migrants coming out and getting these because this is what this segment is that I just showed for you guys. It's about the prepaid debit cards to the tune of $53 million going to migrants in New York City. And this gentleman, for some reason, is bringing up the homeless issue. It's not a homeless issue. If you have $53 million and there's a homeless issue, as he's stating, you put the money there, because it seems like these guys are on the same page, but they're just not. They're reading things differently. Their glasses prescriptions are different, because if there's a homeless issue, $53 million should go to the homeless, and that's basically what this gentleman's saying. Why is it going to this population that just came here illegally? And the thing, why I played all these other clips, that gentleman says they're asylum seekers. Brett Weinstein pointed out as he was interviewing people, boots on the ground, most of them they're seeking economic asylum. That is not allowed. You have to be political asylum. And we keep on going with the premise that everybody that seeks asylum is just in danger. But they just know that's the thing they have to say. They just know they have to be like, I'm in danger. I'm in danger. My government there's people there that will hurt me. They know that's what they have to say. But in reality, they're just like, no, it's a piss poor situation over there. And I just want a better situation, which is valid as well. But you got to do that. You got to do that legally. I don't know. That's just me. I'm not on that show, thankfully. Now we're going to move on to Stephen A. Smith. Stephen A. Smith is somebody who was more into the sports side of the world, focusing there. But he started his own YouTube channel, his own outlet, and he's starting to wake up to things. I'm telling you, that's what happens when you start these YouTube channels. You think that you're going to be focusing on one thing, and then the world comes at you, and you start waking up to some stuff. And he's one of those people that was just Democrat, vote blue no matter who. And now he's starting to wake up to things, and he has such a great voice. I'm so glad that he is starting to wake up, because just listen to him go.
Pick and choose. What it came down to for me is this. I see homeless folks in the streets of New York all the time that are American citizens. I damn sure see them in California. We've got poor, impoverished, starving people who were born and raised in this nation. How in the hell do we come up with a $53 million pilot program for illegals, but folks who are here legally are born here, we don't have enough for them? Just like we could come up with billions for Ukraine, but somehow, some way, we can't fix the homeless problem. I'm down for helping Israel. I'm down for helping address the situations with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, okay? I'm down for helping the Ukrainians and fighting off Russia. What about poor and desolate citizens here? How the hell do you print money for foreign countries, but you don't print that money to help eradicate folks that are starving right here in the streets of America, who were born and raised here?
He's speaking like some right-wing reactionary, and he's not done yet.
You can talk about employment all you want to. You can talk about the labor participation rate. But guess what? If you ain't making no damn money and you got to get 2 jobs to pay the same prices or to buy the same amount of stuff that you used to buy, and the price is higher than it used to be because of inflation, then guess what? What are you really accomplishing? That's why Trump is on the verge of getting elected.
He has a great voice, and I love that he's speaking about this stuff in this way, because again, he's been a lefty for so long because, you know, he's in media and he's been on like a major media outlet, so naturally you're gonna sway left because you have to, or else you're gonna get fired. But then he ended up getting fired anyway, so he ended up waking up a little bit. Actually, I shouldn't say he got fired. He might have left. I'm not sure his situation, but he's broken the chains. He's like the sports version of like Tucker Carlson. Great voice. I hope he keeps talking about this stuff because it's so true. And it becomes undeniable. You can be, I don't know how anybody could be, you know, identifying as being on the left and be in New York and see something like that and just go, yeah, good. But to know how New York is, to know how it is in parts of Harlem, in parts of Queens, to know how it is with the homeless and the crime and all these things, and see that and be like, that's great. It's wild. Absolutely wild. And you know what? I can't, if you're identifying as like left leaning and you didn't wake up when the mayor actually said, hey, if you have an extra room, we have all these immigrants, if you could just give them an extra room, it'll help with your rent. If you didn't wake up from that, if you didn't wake up from him saying, hey, we're going to have these robot police officers on the streets nowadays, they look like R2-D2 running around, I don't know. If you didn't wake up when he was like, we're going to start tracking your meat consumption, get out of here. New York is terrible. Absolutely terrible. Joe Rogan always talks about, California being communist. Man, New York is like way ahead. This is Tucker Carlson. Just giving you some straight up facts. Let's end it with this.
The numbers you need to understand. Yale University released a study last week by 3 researchers, all of them liberal, I believe, who concluded that the actual number of illegal aliens in this country is not 11 million. It's north of 22 million. 22 million. Fact 1. Fact 2. The Democratic Party is now, as a matter of policy, calling for the legalization of all illegals in this country. Citizenship voting rights. 22 million new voters. Fact 3. The overwhelming majority of first-time immigrant voters vote Democrat. Fact 4, the largest margin in American presidential history was 17 million votes, 1984 election between Mondale and Reagan.
And Reagan, yeah.
17 million. You would add to our voter rolls 22 million, at least, permanent electoral majority in perpetuity. That's what this is about. It's not about making the country better, serving our labor needs, helping the population. It's about putting Democrats in power forever. That is the truth of our immigration debate, period.
And then you have that. There's just so many different things. Again, I listed it before. It could be for votes. It could be because they need a different type of military presence, a different type of people in a police presence. And it could be some kind of invasion that's cloaked in economic asylum. And that is also cloaked in political asylum. The cure for all of these things, all of them, the cure for all of these things is to seal up the border. Is to just seal it up And everybody who comes into the country has to come in legally. That is it. That is it. All those things that I just mentioned. That is the cure. Money into the border. Other than that, guys, share the episode, like the episode, and let me know what you guys think of all this in the comments. Other than that, I'm out.